Hello and welcome to another episode of Off the Ruck, your weekly rugby breakdown with me, John Ferguson. And we have our friend from across the ditch, Jamie Wall, back with us today to talk about all things All Blacks and Ireland, because that is a big part of the Quilter Nations Series and, of course, the All Blacks Grand Slam. Welcome back, Jamie.
Thanks, John. Great to be talking with you again, man.
How was the experience in Chicago? Because from afar, it was a real shame that I couldn't get there, but from afar, it looked like an awesome cultivating experience. As the rugby on the field aside, we'll get to that in a second, but the actual trip to Chicago.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool trip, man. If anyone's out there who's thinking about going to Chicago, I'd highly recommend it. Especially around this time of the year. We were told it was going to be pretty cold, and it was chilly, but it definitely wasn't anywhere near as cold as we thought it was going to be. The weather was actually overhead was pretty sunny and mild. So and the day of the game was probably something that Australians wouldn't be used to in terms of temperature, but it certainly was nicer than what it can get in New Zealand in the middle of winter. So yeah, that side of it was pretty cool. Soldier Field is a pretty interesting stadium. I'm not sure if you know too much about it, but it's
No, please do
it's
tell.
it's a it's a very old stadium, and it was in fact designated as a heritage building because of its dedication to the armed services over there. And so they couldn't just tear it down and rebuild a new one. And so they had to kind of make do with sort of inserting another stadium on top of it. So it looks like this giant spaceship's landed on top of these sort of Greco-Roman columns that run around it. So it's a really weird looking stadium. It's all very asymmetrical inside, but when it filled up with 62,000 people, it was pretty awesome. Being an NFL stadium, though, everyone's quite close to the ground. It did mean that the pitch was not as wide as it should have been, and the end goals weren't as long as they should have been,
Mm.
which is a kind of an interesting discussion considering they want to host a Rugby World Cup in America. How they're actually going to do that, I'm not sure. But yeah, a lot of fans, obviously a lot of Irish, both ones that have
Yeah.
travelled and ones that are based in America. But I think the overwhelming amount of fans who were there were actually American rugby people who'd come in from all over the States. It was a really big week for New Zealand rugby. They had a lot of off-field commercial stuff happening, which the All Blacks are obviously a massive part of. And it being the first match of a supposed Grand Slam tour by the All Blacks, it was, quite a lot of tension around this one because you'd think that this one in Ireland, this one in England, would be the sort of key ones on this tour. So yeah, to come away with the win afterwards is pretty satisfying. And like I said, it was a big week off the field. I think they ticked a few boxes last week.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome to hear, and to hear about the stadium and the spaceship, archaic, like that contrast. That's so awesome to hear because that is what you do to travel to see rugby. You get rugby in all kinds of places. Like the Wallabies this weekend are heading to Udine that they've never played in Italy. And that's going to be an awesome experience for all the Wallabies players and the staff. As well as that town that has played there because the Wallabies have never played there. I'm sure there's some people with Australian heritage, as in Australian family or the vice versa, that have never watched a Wallabies game. So it'll be an awesome experience. But sticking with this game, what are your initial thoughts on the game? Because 26-13 perhaps flatters the All Blacks in the sense that that wasn't the margin for the entirety of the game. It was really that only last 20 to 30 minutes where they really pulled away and really showed their power and class. What's the overall feeling? Because the initial view that I have is that it was more of the same that they struggled through throughout the rugby championship. And then it really took some breaking of inertia from players that perhaps haven't been the key or the focus for a lot of people outside of New Zealand, but really started to step up. And it was really impressive. And I loved the way they played in the last 30 minutes. But overall, it was a really, really it wasn't a great contest or advertisement for rugby, really.
Yeah, that it's interesting you say that because that's of course what we've been talking about ever since the full-time whistle blew is what sort of advertisement for rugby is it? Personally, I think if you're an American and you'd paid money to watch that, I don't think you'd be too upset because I think you'd just be happy that there's a major rugby test in a massive stadium happening in your country. And if you're a local, like even better. So, and then given that the sort of standard of rugby that they usually watch locally, I think they're pretty happy to see the All Blacks there. Um, but just from an All Black point of view, it did really feel like okay, let's just get this done and get out of here kind of test match, which to be perfectly honest with you is kind of as a New Zealander is kind of where you want them to be, that they can just sort of turn out 20 minutes worth of good rugby and still come away with a pretty comprehensive win in the end. I think there's some serious parallels I think you can draw between that game and the corresponding fixture last year. It was almost the same scoreline, even, and I think that both of those games involved sort of similar All Black performances, but one was obviously of much higher quality than I'm talking about last year, of course. And it was against an Irish team, and all of the talk about them during the week was about how they hadn't played together since March, and how they'd had players out with the British and Irish Lions and things. And it kind of turned out to be correct because they did really run out of ideas at the end. Yeah, it wasn't pretty for a lot of the game. There was a lot of sort of set piece issues for both teams, but I think there's enough good stuff in there for the All Blacks, which I think is worth sort of putting up front, and that is that the guys that came off the bench played really well, and I think you could say that a couple of them actually swung the game in the All Blacks' favour, which is exactly where you want your bench to be. You had two big serious injuries in the first sort of 10 minutes with both of the Barrett, with both Scott and Geordie Barrett leaving the field. They're obviously key players. Scott's the captain. He was replaced by Josh Lord, a guy who's played, I think, something like half a dozen tests in five
Very little
years.
rugby. Very little
Yeah,
rugby.
and very little rugby outside of Test rugby as well because he's been so
Mhm.
injured.
Yeah.
And so the joke about him is that we don't even know if he is good at rugby because we've barely ever seen him play.
Yeah.
And I think that he certainly wiped a few smiles off some faces with that performance because it turns out he can. He can do really
Yeah.
well. And he was chucked in a really pressure cooker situation after only 3 minutes to come in and be the main line out forward. And then Leicester Fainga'anuku, who came off the bench as well. And he's a guy who we've been waiting to see in action for a long time. Now I'm surprised that he wasn't used earlier. He had that good shift in Perth and then came off the bench and, yeah, played really, really well. And then probably the most impactful guy that came off the bench and again had to come and go because of what was happening on the field was Wallace Satiti, who was really playing like he had a point to prove because he was coming into the season as a guy who was definitely a locked-in starter. Both his injury concerns and the emergence of Peter Lakai has meant that he was on the bench. So, if he'd had a rocket put up him, like he definitely went out and showed it, scoring a really good try. Should have had another one at the end, but also just his work around the field as well. So I think that is the main positive out of this because this is a tour for the All Blacks and it shows that they have the depth to cover uh, key injuries. It's gonna be a lot tougher now without Scott Barrett and without Geordie Barrett, but the cover is there, and it's just hopefully that they can not lose to too many other players in those areas.
You touched on a couple of points that I want to go through, but the first one is the injuries to Geordie Barrett and Scott Barrett. They're still under medical review to see how long these injuries will take to heal. But Josh Berry has joined the group to be able to cover injury, but no back replacements have been brought in. Obviously, we saw at the weekend you guys have the kind of cover with the likes of D-Mac and Leicester Fainga'anuku. You also have Quinter Pye there. You have a very flex. There's Rico Ioane as well. You have players that can come in and out and cover different positions. So it is. I understand why that has been made, but I think there's not too much to say about this. But I want to state first that I think Geordie Barrett is still one of your premier bats in that back line when he's fit and firing. I don't think that Leicester Fainga'anuku's performance should should have anything negative to do with Geordie Barrett. But what I do think is really interesting, that stylistically, having power centers like Quinn Tupaia and Leicester Fainga'anuku looked like it really worked for you guys. And I think that, I mean, you and I chatted a little bit about Leicester when we knew that he was coming back in our first chat. And his speed, but also his bulk alongside the directness of Quinn, because Leicester can come in and out. We know that when he plays wing, he against the Wallabies, he came out and did that traditional short running line of a blindside wing and squared up on Joseph Asuali'i and just left him on the ground. So it it's just such a good combo, and that gives me flashes back to Nonu and Smith, and like they're very different players to Nonu and Smith, but it gives me that assuredness that the center is somewhere that you guys can dominate. Is that how kind of you see it? Because you've written an article this week for RNZ. I'll link it in the description below. You go through the game, but you mentioned Leicester. You do mention another player, and we'll get to them in a second. But Leicester specifically with Quinn, I just feel like you guys looked so much like assured DNA with those guys in the midfield.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it, to know that uh, in the past losing someone like Geordie would have been like a crisis. It still is a little bit of a crisis, to be fair. Like, he's a senior. The thing that you're losing with him is also his seniority. He is the vice captain now, after all.
Absolutely.
But it is exciting to think that we could see a centre combination of Leicester Fainga'anuku and Quinn Tupaia, who are two guys that are really in form right now. Because I think Quinn had another good game on the weekend, and yeah, because when it was announced that Leicester was coming back into New Zealand rugby, it was sort of thought like, well, there's a reason why they've brought him back. So he's going to go straight into the All Blacks. And then the question was, well, whose place is he going to take? At the moment, it feels like he's taken Rieko Ioane's spot because of his ability to cover midfield and wing. Plus, he's probably just got a little bit more pace on him at the moment. And you saw his decision-making ability on the weekend when he set up that break for Will Jordan that eventually ended up in Adi Savia's try as well. And that was after only being on the field for about 30 seconds. So he's a classy player, and just where he goes in this All Black setup from now on is going to be really interesting. And of course they also have Anton Leonard-Brown in the squad. He hasn't played 80 tests by accident, so there's another very handy replacement there. And then you have the All Blacks 15 as well floating around in the same country. So there's a bunch of guys that they can call on in there. David Havili is in there as well. So yeah, there's a few guys that they can call on, but at the moment, it's looking like Quinn Tupaia and Leicester Fainga'anuku for this weekend.
It's extremely exciting, and let's see what you guys go with and against Scotland this weekend, and we'll get to that at the very end. But before we go to another positive for the All Blacks, a negative, I think that you lose someone like Scott Barrett, and then you don't have Tupou Vaa'i, and you also don't have Patrick Tuipulotu. All of a sudden, you're losing a lot of experience in the second row, and the line out wasn't exactly firing
Yeah.
at the weekend. You guys competed well. But I thought that Ireland did a pretty decent job with you guys at the line out. But conversely, the scrum and Priscilla Tossi particularly stepped up against the young debutant, Joe McCarthy's younger brother, Paddy. So, which was really exciting for Ireland. But I thought that over the 80 minutes, I thought that you guys scrummed really well. And that is, ever since you guys got dominated in that Wellington game, it's really something you guys have retaken and worked at again. And I think you guys have such a good promise. And I think that with Fletcher Newell, you guys are still trying to work out that best combination because obviously you are missing Tyrell Lomax, etc. And you've got such a good scrummager in Ethan de Groot, but Tamati Williams is such a huge lump of a man that's such a key ball runner as well and an enforcer around the ball. Um, yeah, do you want to talk to me a little bit about that? Because for me, I just feel like you guys have the tools. I'm just not sure if the combo is quite right yet.
I think the scrum in general has been probably the best aspect of the All Blacks. No Scott Robertson, and you mentioned those tests against the Springboks, including that really embarrassing moment at Eden Park, in a test that they admittedly did win. But then again, in Wellington, that feels more like a blip than anything else because it has been something that they've been able to count on to win some key penalties and get some easy field position. And as soon as that first penalty got blown at Soldier Field, I thought, oh, this is the All Blacks game to lose right now, because this is an Irish team that sort of everything runs off their set piece. You know, they if they don't have that dominance, then they're not going to be able to really do much. And then the All Blacks started disrupting their line out as well. And yes, the All Blacks line out was pretty shaky at times. But I feel like what they were doing on the Irish side of the ball kind of made up for it. And when it came to that last 20 minutes of let's keep the ball down the right end of the field, it was off the back of scrum dominance. So can't really fault that at all. Yeah, you're right around just who's going to be in there. I think the starting front row for this tour is pretty much set in terms of the group who's had a really good year. Taylor, obviously, he's just been around forever, and Newell is in really good form as well. And then you've got Tossie and Tamati Williams coming off the bench. The two biggest guys, I think the two biggest guys who've ever played for the All Blacks. So it's not a bad rotation to be using, and I feel like Williams will likely get a start at some point, just due to the way that they manage their front rows nowadays. And then that last test against Wales, they'll probably change the whole thing out. So that's probably the most positive aspect of the All Blacks right now, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. And I think that you'll need it against someone like England, who I thought that weren't great in the first half against the Wallabies, but certainly were able to apply some pressure there with Ellis Genge and Will Stewart there in the second half, along with Luke Cowan-Dickie and Theo Dan. I just think that combination is so powerful in so many elements. It's got its merits. So very excited to see how the set piece battle goes with the All Blacks moving forward. I think a player that you mentioned in your article, like I said, I'll link it below. And it was someone that when I was going through the stats, I was just like, I remember seeing him, but I didn't remember him being this dominant. But Caleb Clarke was absolutely dominant, like to the point where we can talk about Leicester Fainga'anuku all we want. And I think it was just because he was doing it in tight quarters. But Caleb Clarke carried the most of any player in the entire contest, so 14 times. He only Sevilla and Jordan carried more than 10 times for the ABs. He made the most line breaks of the game, which was 3, and he beat some defenders as well. But he also got turned over the most of any player, which was 3 times. And I think that's more about where his support is as opposed to what he was doing. But that's something you got to manage. So it wasn't a perfect game, but overall, Caleb Clarke was extremely impressive. And I just hope that he maintains his fitness and he remains in this rich vein of form, because he has promised for so long to be such a dominant force at test level.
Yeah, and you can also point out that he had his biggest opposition defender had a massive advantage on him, and what I'm talking about is the touchline, because it was 3 meters closer than it should have been on either side. And you can see that the first time Leroy Carter got the ball, he was just hammered into touch like as soon as he got it. And that's something that Caleb Clarke had to deal with on the other wing, and I think he did a really good job. And I think the All Blacks probably suffered a little bit from not sort of realizing how skinny the field was. They said that they trained on a similar sized field during the week. If they did, they didn't train hard enough, because it felt like Ireland were a lot more adept in that first half of kind of knowing their spatial awareness was. So, yeah, great game from Caleb. He just needs to stay fit. That's my main thing, and it's not his fault. He's getting injured, and that he has the potential to be, the best winger in the world, if the best power winger anyway. It's hard to compare wingers. You can't compare him to a guy like Curtly Arendse or whoever, because just the way that they're used. He has a definite commission to come in field, act as an extra loose forward as well, act as an extra tight forward carrying the ball if he wants to. So
Yeah.
really, really utilizing every part of his skill set and physicality. Um, and it's just also that this game just showcases just how good he'd be at rugby league if he decided to make the switch over as well, which he has hinted at. So
Mm.
let's hope for the All Blacks' sake that he decides to stay put and stay fit.
Yep. No, absolutely. It was magical to see him play. And then I think just a quick comment on the Irish. I think that sorry, the Irish side, I was quite impressed with Crowley. I liked where he went with most of his game. Obviously, subbed in late for out for Prendergast. I was extremely impressed with Stuart McCluskey, the inside center for Ireland. I thought that he ran really hard. He got them over the gain line. He did a lot of the ugly thing, which a lot of people want to do. I don't think Barry Ringrose had his best game. He shot a couple of times and got shrugged off, and that was kind of difficult from a defensive setting point. I actually thought I think the winger's named O'Brien. I didn't know who he was, but I thought he had a pretty good game as well. And I thought Osborne did okay at the back. The pack obviously did as best as they could with a man down and Tyburn being given that red card. But I think you guys had the wood over them up front, and that's something they're going to have to rotate. But of course, congratulations to uh, Paddy McCarthy, and also welcome back Kalen Doris because he was a difference maker and he was extremely impressive. And I'm very thankful as a Wallaby supporter, although a little bit sad. If he was on the Lions tour, I think that would have made a huge difference to their game because although I think Jack Conan's a great player, Kalen Doris is different gravy. He's up in that echelon of Sarvia and Jasper Visa and the ability to just get gainline no matter what. Do you have any comments on the Irish team before we wrap up and move to a quick wrap of look ahead to the Scotland game?
Yeah, I got to echo the thoughts about Stuart McCloskey. I thought he was really good as a guy that we didn't really know much about. Obviously, we don't get to watch their rugby down here, but if he's keeping Bundyaki, and we had heard during the week that Bundyaki was carrying sort of an injury, but clearly not one serious enough to stop him playing. So if this guy Stuart McCloskey was coming in to replace him, like that's a pretty big statement considering how integral Bundyaki has been for the Irish team ever since he's been picked. And another guy, I'd like to mention Jamison Gibson Park. I thought he had a really good game.
Yeah, absolutely.
As usual, he's just so consistent in that area, and he was pretty much the reason that they scored their only try was his decision making around that ruck. He just didn't really get enough help around him, and he was going behind a beaten pack. It must be pretty disheartening to standing there waiting to feed the ball to scrum and watching the referee put his arm up for a penalty before you even had the chance to do so. So it's I again have to hark back to last year's game because it was clearly an Irish team that was just a bit rusty. They'll be better for it. They play the Springboks in this series, do they?
The Irish, I'm not sure. Let me have a quick look. That's a good question. 23rd of November. They do indeed.
Yeah, so I'll be really looking forward to that game because they'll fancy themselves at home. They've had a pretty good record against the Springboks at home, and they'll be up to speed by then. So that should be one that's definitely worth getting up early to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really thankful that you mentioned James and Gibson Park because as you said, I don't think they would have been in the contest to the extent that they were without his lethal and accurate passing. Whether it's 2 meters, and I said this in the preview, whether it's 2 meters or 20 meters, he hits them on the chest, and those players are running such good angles that it's so hard to stop. So the All Blacks didn't want to be defending in their 22, and they paid for it when they were, and they did a good job of keeping them out of their 22 as well. But as I think, as you mentioned at the start, Ireland did begin to run out of ideas, and I think that just comes down to missing a couple of key ball runners. You're missing Big Joe McCarthy. Obviously, Gary Ringrose wasn't having his best game, and Mac Hansen's actually a very important. Although he's not a big ball runner, he does create some magic out of nothing. So when you're going toe to toe with some of the best teams in the world, you're going to need your best roster, and they were just missing a couple of key members there. But Throwing forward to this Scotland game, I mean, we don't know too much. We're recording now. It's Tuesday afternoon, and I guess what I'd like to ask you is where are you going to see the dangers from Scotland, and what changes do you expect to see in the All Blacks setup?
Well, obviously the injury enforced ones that we've kind of gone over, but I can't see many others. I don't think anyone played them, even though it was a, you know, what's the best way? Like kind of flat, mostly flat All Black performance. I don't think anyone played themselves out of the team in that regard. And also Scott Robertson's selection logic means that it's pretty hard to make your way out of the team. I think because of Geordie's injury, I think Rieko Ioane comes back on the bench in that 22 jersey. And but the Fabian Holland and I'm guessing Josh Law would have to start at lock there, so that opens up. They have used Sam Penny-Finau as a replacement lock this year here, so that's a potential possibility on the bench there. But we'll know later in the week as well, because for all we know, there could be some other injury concerns running around there. But in terms of Scotland, like again, kind of difficult. They played the USA on the
Yep.
weekend and beat them by like
Thumped
100
him like
points or something.
85 something. Yeah.
Yeah, so difficult to read into that. Difficult to read into their July series as well because they had their best players obviously away with the Lions. I think it probably affects them more than the Irish because they, at least the sort of bulk of their Irish team was playing in that Lions team and had Andy Farrell coaching them as well. So they've sort of kept that connection up.
That's a good
That was a
point.
Scottish team that came down here, played them. I mean, they got a good win against the Māori All Blacks, and then I think went up to Fiji. Uh, but how much of that team, like I'll put it this way: like you'll have guys coming back in that were on that Lions team, but I don't know if it's going to make like sort of that much of a difference. They'll be fancying their chances as they always do, and fair enough too, because they've never beaten the All Blacks, so that they definitely have to go in with this "it's now or never" kind of attitude. And I mean, the other thing is, the All Blacks don't really play them that often. I was at the last game that they played in Murrayfield over there, and they shot out to about a 17-0 lead, and everyone was thinking, "Oh my God, is this the day? Is this they do it?" And the All Blacks just regrouped, got back, ground out like a really good win in the end. So I kind of feel like it might be a game like that. If Scotland are going to have any chance, they're going to need to score a couple of tries early and then play the game of their lives and then hope that the All Blacks can kind of muck it up. There's no disrespect to Scotland at all. I think they're a really good team. I want them to be good. I think they've definitely got the players in there to be able to do it. I just think they get inside their heads far too much. Much like a lot of other teams that play the All Blacks do as well. And because of the infrequency of which they play, this will be built up to a massive, massive sort of level in front of another massive crowd in Murrayfield.
Yeah, I hope it is a stellar contest. I do see some real peril around the scrum time for them. Gooman definitely wasn't the best scrummager on the Lions tour. He wasn't exactly a test starter. And then you've got the likes of Xander Fagerson, which was very much possibly have been a starter for the Lions, still waiting to see if he passes a fitness test. So that is going to be really interesting to see how it goes. And if that's not the case, I do fear, even if he does pass, he probably hasn't played enough rugby. He hasn't played enough rugby to be able to be straight back at his best. So a little bit of pain for the Scottish there. Line out, they're very good at the line out. They have a pack that can operate with a lot of jumpers and a lot of stealers. So that should be fine. Obviously, world class 9 and 10 combination. Sione Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones, stellar centers, and then they've got the Whippet on one wing, which is Graham, and then you've got the bulldozer on one. Although he wasn't particularly impressive during the Lions series, there Duhan van der Merwe, and then obviously Blair Kinghorn if he's trotting along well based on form. So they do have a stellar side on for most of the side in the starting 15. It's going to be how the depth comes on, but it's going to be really interesting to see how they go. For the All Blacks, I just hope that they don't have too many injuries because it would be a shame to not see some of those combinations flourish. And it's interesting to see where they go at number 6, obviously with Wallace Atiti having such an impressive game. Simon Parker receiving a bit of a head knock. He's been a revelation, really, kind of coming out of nowhere, surpassed Semi Penny Fee now. And then now, as you mentioned, might have to slot into the second row with the injuries to Scott Barrett. But I think that's all we have time for. Actually, no, one quick comment from you. Sorry that I have to grab you here. Jason Holland, give us a quick wrap on that, because this is the second coach that is left now under Scott Razor Robinson in as many years.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I actually had a chat with Jason in Chicago. You know, he's a pretty straight up and down guy. He's very popular with the players. So this was a bit of a shock because I guess if you're reading into it, you would have to say that maybe he just wasn't really feeling like he fitted in to that coaching group. Maybe his voice wasn't being heard enough. And really, like, given his job title was coaching strike options, it felt like a very kind of minimalistic use of his
Extremely
skills.
niche.
Yeah, and I asked him about. I was like, "What does that even mean?" And I did an interview with him a few months ago, and it's basically just plays off first phase. And gee, that seems, considering you were a head coach at Super Rugby level of a very good Hurricanes team stacked with talent. This seems like you've had your job like sort of whittled down to about the absolute bare minimum. So I'm thinking maybe that's it. On yeah, I mean, on the negative side, you're right. That's two coaches that don't want to be All Black assistants anymore. On the positive, though, I will say one thing, because I don't think that those guys should have ever been aiming to be All Black assistant head coaches in the first place. If you're a head coach at a team, you don't want to be going to be an assistant coach at a team. And it doesn't matter if it's test level. That's not where you should be aspiring to be. But it definitely took away from Super Rugby, because for a while there we had, I think, 4 out of the 5 New Zealand teams were guys who had their eye on coaching at test level. And I don't think that's a good thing. It's not good. It's not healthy for the game that you would aspire to be an assistant over a head coach. I like to think that maybe Jason Holland's had a bit of a tap from Queensland Reds, maybe who might need a new coach, or is just simply like looking around, thinking, I want to have more control. I want to be able to pick my own players. I want to be doing more than just one whiteboard session a week. So yeah, that's my read on it. It feels like there are a few guys in that All Black coaching setup whose roles aren't quite as defined as they could be. What exactly is going on in there is probably like a podcast on its own, but it is very much kind of joining dots rather than actually saying that definitively this is what's happened. So I don't want to get too far into it, but I will say one thing, that I wish Jason Holland all the best. He's a good guy. He's definitely a very good coach, and he deserves to land somewhere with a bunch of really good players, listening to what he has to say every week.
Yeah, watch this space. Let's see how that goes. And then watch the space for the All Blacks. There's going to be a bunch of team news coming out this week. There's going to be lots of analysis being done ahead from the Scottish side as well as the All Black side. This is a really exciting game that's coming up, and is all, of course, all part of the Grand Slam. But so, Jamie, thank you so much for all your insights on the trip to Chicago, the game itself, Jason Holland, and the All Black squad. So thank you so much for coming along. I really appreciate it.
No problem, mate. Anytime.
And to all you guys, keep your eye out on the rest of the news. I'm going to put Jamie's article where he breaks down the game in Chicago and what's ahead for the All Blacks in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss a video at all, and you get notified when that new video gets up. I'm John Ferguson. This is Off the Ruck. You guys enjoy your rugby until the next video. Ciao.